Today, I'm taking us back to pre-code Hollywood. Are you excited for our time-traveling journey?
Yes, I am. Let's get in our hot tub and go back to 1932.
Drive the highway down the moon. Past the billboard where you see me. See me, see me, see me. Ask the people for their king.
Welcome to the Silver Nitrate Witches movie review brew. We're here to explore the way we review movies. From experienced critics to posts from casual viewers, we want to talk about how we talk about movies, how that's changed over time, what directions we see it going in, and more. We are your Silver Nitrate Witches. I'm Isabel Lang. I'm a poet, academic editor, and tarot reader.
And my name is Laura Valenza. I'm the film editor at the Brooklyn Rail, and I'm a sandwich. Yum.
I love that. I love that so much. Okay. I need to... I need to get all my screens in order again. Okay. So, today... Where's my mouse? Here we are. I'm taking us back to pre-code Hollywood. Are you excited for our time travel?
Quote.
Today, I'm taking us back to pre-code Hollywood. Are you excited for our time-traveling journey?
Yes, I am. Let's get in our hot tub and go back to 1932.
Also an underrated movie, absolutely. All right, so today we are going to talk about the reception of Grand Hotel from 1932. So it is just Grand Hotel. I had that problem a lot when I was researching. I kept wanting to type in the Grand Hotel, and then I kept getting
Me too.
information about like actual hotels. No, this is not what I want to do. I think, the Grand Budapest Hotel kept coming in my brain, which does have an article in it, but this one does not. So just Grand Hotel. This is a film inspired by a stage show of the same title, which had been adapted from a German novel with the same story. And it is actually, in the time since, had a handful of remakes, both as film and on the stage. It's actually been remade as a musical before now. And I think most notably in its history, it had this unique instance of winning an Oscar for Best Picture when it had not been nominated for literally any other category. Which apparently has never happened prior or since. This was the only thing it was nominated for, was Best Picture,
distinction.
And it fucking took it.
All right.
Yeah. So, more about the text itself. The screenplay was written by the same person who wrote the book for the stage show, William Drake. He adapted it from the novel by the German authoress Vicky Baum. I don't necessarily want to call her an authoress, but every other newspaper clipping I saw was calling her that because they're all from the 30s, and they were like, we have to make sure you know that she's a lady. And then directed by Edmund Golding, whose name I've spelled wrong here, but that doesn't super matter anyway. It had, as I'm sure you recognize when you started to watch it. Yes, go ahead.
Wait, I'm sorry. Correction. I'm having it come up that she was an Austrian writer.
Austrian writer. I apologize.
Yes.
Thank you.
that means it would have been written in German.
But still, no. But yes,
Yeah.
Thank you for the correction. That is definitely important, given some of the other history things we're going to discuss. So it had, as I'm sure you noticed, and as we've discussed already, a spectacularly star-studded cast for its time. And even in later years, not just it was a big deal for these stars at this time, but even in the years after the movie has come out and been popular, people are these are still famous people that we recognize as a big deal in our time, some of them anyway. One of my favorite things to think about with this movie is actually from another movie, which is also on my list that I would like us to talk about one day, called The Apartment. Have you ever heard of this? It's from the 60s.
I have, because you talk about it a lot.
I love this movie. It's so cute. And there's a great bit in The Apartment where the main character, Jack Lemmon, he's the sad office worker. He comes home late at night from a horrible day. He's having a tiny, sad dinner in his tiny, sad living room. And he turns on his TV to just kind of forget the day and wind down. And an ad for Grand Hotel comes on saying it's going to be airing. And it says, airing Soon, Grand Hotel with Greta Garbo, John and Lionel Barrymore, Joan Crawford, all these other great people, blah, 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 blah. And then with every name, his face, like the camera's on his face, and with every new name they mention, it like lights up a bit more, and he gets a bit more excited. Like, this is just gonna make his fucking night after this terrible day he's had. And then it's like, after these 12,000 commercial breaks or something, and then he gets sad again and he turns the TV off and goes to bed. And it's like, and that's like 30 years later, this movie was having an effect, so much so that in another classic film, they were like, we gotta talk about how great this movie is. Anyway, but of that star-studded cast, the people that most folks would probably recognize, there's quite a few other folks that were really big at the time, but I think the ones that most of us would know now are the big four: Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford, and then John and Lionel Barrymore. And yes, that is Barrymore, like Drew, the Barrymore Hollywood family. I almost said the Barrymore crime family, which I don't know, but no, they're not. All right, so let's talk budget. This movie had what would have been, by today's standards, considered, I think, a pretty small budget, even when you account for inflation. The budget at the time was $750,000, which is $16 million in today's money. And for comparison, when we talked...
that is a small budget today, but I don't know if that would have been a small budget back then.
Right, okay, yeah. See,
Yeah.
It's hard with inflation to consider, but it made, in its time, $2.5 million at the box office, which is almost $60 million today. So, safe to say, the big star-studded casting worked out and did pretty well.
Do you know if this was that era when this was still like the era when it was more about the stars almost than like characters?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because we're going to talk about that. Okay, so hold on to your questions until the end of the presentation. Thank you. We will absolutely get to that.
I'm sorry.
Some history, though, to kind of go along with that moment is this was not like right at the beginning of the talkies era, but certainly like we had just kind of gotten over the hump of the first kind of talking pictures. So a lot of studios were like full on doing no more silent films, just like talking movies, but they were still struggling in an interesting way with some of the sound engineering in production. Some interesting things I learned about this. One interesting fact I learned about this movie is there's all of these grand sweeping shots like through the lobby and the dance floor of the bar and everything. And they, I guess like mics were set up very differently or weren't quite as attuned as they are now. And they had to, all of the extras in the background had to wrap their shoes, like in their feet, in like cotton and fabric, so that they wouldn't make sound shuffling around the building that would interfere with the actors speaking. And I just think that's so strange and hilarious. But that's kind of the film era where we're resting in right now. It is set during the same time that it's produced, so early 1930s. So that's between the two world wars and also during the Great Depression, and just a few years before the Hays Code would have made parts of this film had to be cut entirely. So thank God it arrived when it did. All right, and then
no more of those implications of having premarital sex in exchange for money.
What? Oh my God, one of my favorite lines we're going to talk about in a bit, because there's one reviewer who talks about some of the lines between Joan Crawford and that guy, and it's
the creepy guy.
And the things that they could have gotten away with then that they couldn't have after.
Don't they have a whole conversation about like, and you've traveled, right?
Yeah, I'll read you the line now, because it's just so fun. What was it? He asks her, I don't suppose you'd take dictation from me sometime, would you?
Oh my God, that one, I like almost had to pause. Because
it's just like, wow, you really said that. You really said that. Okay, yeah. So, yes, so that's the kind of era we're in, where you can say shit like that.
There were actually a lot of dictation jokes.
Well, yeah.
In that movie.
Absolutely.
Pretty much every time they said the word dictation, you were like, okay. All right.
Yeah, and so we're in an era where you can not entirely get away with that, but pretty frequently get away with that. We'll talk about some ways that did make the release of the film a little bit funny in some places. But so
actually, while we're on the topic of dictation,
tell me about dictation, Laura.
I'm going to tell you so much about dictation.
I should not have taken a sip of my drink when you started that. Go
ahead. Okay, so I have to give credit to Professor Jennifer Hill at the University of Nevada for this, but in a lecture on
which University of Nevada is that?
Reno.
Thank you.
Boo, Las Vegas. But during one of Professor Jennifer Hill's lectures, she talked about this novel from around 1900. It may have been published in 1900, but I'd have to double check, called The Typewriter Girl. It's about a stenographer. And it's really capturing this moment where women are actually able to get a job and earn money and have some independence. And there is a romance between the typewriter girl and the man she takes dictation from.
Of course.
Of course. And Jen had this really great reading of that where she was like, there's one scene in which the typewriter girl is taking dictation and it feels very intimate. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Jen's reading of that book is that there is plenty of sex in that book. The sex is the act of taking dictation. It is the typewriter. And I think this is also really interesting too, because part of what Jen was talking about in that book too has to do with like the typewriter as this machine, and the typewriter girl is always on her bicycle, which is also a machine. So there's kind of this weird like machines mediating our intimate relationships. I'm gonna press pause on that here because I have a lot more to say about that in this movie.
Yes,
but I think we have more setup to do before we get to that.
We're gonna talk about Joan Crawford and
putting
that
out
so
there.
Super neat. I'm also absolutely going to read that. That sounds amazing.
Oh, that book is really good. Highly recommend it. It's only like 100 pages, so you can like enjoy it in an afternoon.
Perfect. Okay. Mm-hmm. So back to our story.
Yes.
At the Grand Hotel in Berlin. The whole film takes place inside the Grand Hotel in Berlin. Opening on a regular resident of the hotel who kind of sets the scene for us, remarking, people coming, going, nothing ever happens. And then, of course, all of the things happen. We meet a wide cast of characters who, I said this before we started recording.
Wait, can we press pause there, too? Because I also have something to say about the character who claims nothing ever happens, and then all the things happen. I can't remember if it's him or somebody else later in the movie, but somebody said something about how there's all these rooms with all these doors entering onto one hallway, but nobody knows what's going on behind the doors.
Oh, that's not the quote I thought you were going to say, but I like that.
Oh, okay. And I think that something that's interesting about that and this character who claims nothing ever happens here, and then it's kind of like, wow, you have a funny definition of nothing, dude, is that, and we don't necessarily realize this right away, but this is the character who was scarred from a grenade in World War I.
The doctor, yeah.
So, you know, if you see his face from one side, it looks normal, and when he turns, you see the wounds on the other half of his face. So there's this interesting idea of what we don't know that's happening behind closed doors, and what are the two different faces that people have, and these two, you know, what is the internal trauma that they're hiding, that in the case of the doctor, he wears very literally on his skin.
That's fascinating. I thought you were going to bring up, because my favorite quote from the film is when Greta Garbo's character has this sudden, like, moment of pensiveness among all of her sort of, you know, depression. And she says, the music has stopped. It's so quiet.
Oh, I loved that one.
What is it? The music has stopped. It's quiet tonight. It was never so quiet in the Grand Hotel. Even though all of this craziness is happening just beyond her door. But she almost never leaves her room, and so we never see that from her perspective.
And yet, it's kind of like in that moment, she knows. I think she knows what's happening, because I feel like that idea of the music stopping is so
for a dancer,
metaphorical.
Yeah.
Yes, it's so metaphorical for death. And it parallels her own existentialism and identity crisis with her career and phasing out of it, too.
Speaking of that, let's talk a bit about our cast of characters for those of you at home who haven't seen the film. We meet a wide cast of characters. I said this to Laura before we started recording, and I will say it again here. All of these characters they have German names. It is set in Berlin. All of the characters are German. I do not know how to pronounce a single one of them, and I'm not going to try. So I will instead throughout be referring to them by either little epithets that I have given them that describe their characters, or by the names of the actors who portray them. So the people we meet are a broke baron turned jewel thief or cat burglar, played by John Barrymore.
Who I call Flicks, because that's a nickname he gives himself.
Yes, thank you. I will probably remember Flicks. That's a good one. A sad office worker who finds out he's dying and decides to live out his best life in his last days, who is played by Lionel Barrymore. The sad office worker.
And you call him the dying man.
And I call him the dying man. Yes, thank you. So it's the Baron and the dying man.
Which I'm also going to do because I can't remember his name for the life of me.
There you go. Then we have that sad office worker's boss, like the big boss of his company, who has no idea that his employee is there, who I call the boss. Simple enough.
His name is Otto. No.
I'm sorry.
Otto
Lionel
is
Barrymore's
the dying
name.
man.
Otto is the dying man.
But they never call him by his first name.
They call him by his last Kringle something. Kringeline? Wait,
yeah,
I've got IMDb.
something like that.
Kringeline, I think.
I think.
So we've got the Baron, the dying man, the boss, a traveling secretary / typist stenographer character played by Joan Crawford. I call her the secretary. I will probably more often call her Joan Crawford.
But she also goes by Flemchen.
They call her Miss Flem at some point, so you may hear us saying that.
Yes.
Anyway,
and also the man who introduces the hotel as having nothing going on is the doctor.
Yes, but I don't really talk much about the doctor. He's there in the background, but there's not a lot of reviews that really talk about him either, so we won't really spend a lot of time with the doctor. But yes, the doctor is there as well. So this traveling secretary, Joan Crawford, whom the boss hires under a very poorly disguised desire to fuck her, that we'll talk about more later. And a severely depressed ballerina with a declining career, who we call the ballerina, played by Greta Garbo. Gru, whose jewel collection the Baron seeks to steal as a part of his time at the hotel this evening. Through the various shenanigans that these folks would inevitably get up to, we make up the plot of the film. It is less of a plot-driven thing and more of like a vignette, sort of lots of stories coming together, which we'll also talk about in some of the reviews that kind of have things to say about that. I've got some tarot cards. Do we want to do that, or do we kind of want to dive in with our thoughts and our feelings first?
I mean, I guess we could do the tarot cards now.
All right, so the cards, the characters that I've decided to pull for today are the ones that I decided to go with, the ones that moved me the most. And so I've gone with the ballerina and the dying man, also because that just sounds like a really fucking epic title of a poem that I may write someday. So for the ballerina, Greta Garbo, we have pulled the 9 of Swords. So if you are not a tarot person or familiar with it, the image on this card is a figure of a person sitting up in bed, cupping their head in their hands, as if they've woken up from a terrible nightmare, and there's 9 swords laid out on the wall behind them. And as you could probably assume from the picture on the card, it suggests that the subject of the reading is overwhelmed with dark thoughts and negative feelings, so much so that that kind of becomes your whole being. Like the negative thoughts kind of take over your entire life. Even if what you're thinking doesn't come to happen, the thoughts take over your life so much. It's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, which I think really feels fitting for the ballerina, because though famous and talented and respected, she doesn't sell out shows anymore. She feels like her status is kind of slipping through these clenched fists that she's trying to hold on to her fame with. Because she's not quite as popular as she used to be, she even starts refusing to perform, which makes her less desirable. She's kind of painted as this diva almost, when really she's just very, very sad. And she keeps herself awake all night with worry. It's only soothed in part by the Baron's introduction to her. But even then, what I think is interesting is when the Baron comes in and kind of provides a little bit of relief for her worry, she still stays awake all night. With the Baron, she still can't sleep. She's really stuck herself in this vicious cycle of just finding some kind of new thing to worry at in her mind.
Yeah, and we almost never see her outside of her room.
Yes.
So I think that really speaks to that whole metaphor of being trapped in her own head. And there's that one shot that this movie is exquisitely lit and shot.
We're going to talk about
and there's that.
Yes.
Okay, cool. There's that one shot where the Baron is trying to steal her jewels, and he gets stuck in her room when she comes back in. And he's hiding, I think, in the wardrobe and watching her through, like, the crack. And she comes in her ballerina costume, and she sits on the floor in this very, like, dancer-esque pose, but it's, like, this complete moment of, like, heartbreak and giving up. And it's almost like her tutu is white, and the background becomes, like, almost black. And so you really... And this is right before the Baron hears her... I don't know if she's actually that overt about it, but the implication is that she wants to kill herself.
Yeah.
And so right before that moment, we see this shot of her that feels like there's nothing else around her but this blackness. So even though she is in this very concrete place, we really get that sense of her in her own mind.
I love that you bring that up too, because thinking of that is very evocative of the traditional Nine of Swords image on like a standard tarot deck of just like the person alone in a room surrounded by darkness. So that's even more fascinating. I didn't think of that when I was watching it. So then we've also got the dying man, who I've decided is deserving of the 10 of Cups. Yeah. So it may seem a little out of place because he's, dying. And the 10 of Cups is pretty, happy. But this motherfucker is living his literal best life.
He also, it ends on a really hopeful note.
It ends on a very hopeful note.
Joan Crawford is like, doctors can cure anything.
Right.
Don't be like that.
So what I think fits really well with this is that I always read the 10 of Cups as more than embodying like joy or excitement or pure happiness, as embodying like contentment, where you're like, this is good. This is
contentment,
really good.
or I almost wonder if it's like this height of vitality, because he has a great line, and I'm going to misquote it, which is unfortunate, but he has a great line about how you don't really know how to live until you know dying.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. It's the satisfaction that like things are where you hoped they would be, or where you felt like they should be. Like he's getting what he deserves finally, even though he is dying. So he's finally enjoying this luxurious life he was I wrote this as he's enjoying a luxurious life he was promised for working hard and keeping his head down in his job. We have no way of knowing that that's what he was promised at that specific job, but that's like, very synonymous with like the American dream in the 20th century, which is like you work hard, you do your job, and you'll get what you deserve. But of course that's not how it actually happens, but he's finally getting to do that because he's just saying fuck it to everything. He's making, I would say, true friends, even though, like, we get to the end where the Joan Crawford decides to travel with him, and it's like, doctors can cure everything. She's very specifically being, like, kind and positive and hopeful for him because she knows he's probably dying. But, like, that's what he needs in the moment. And, he meets Flix as well, the Baron, and they become quite a bunch of chums. Even though the Baron tries to steal from him at one point, he gives it all back, and he has a change of heart after he meets the ballerina. And
right, and and there is some like implication too. Like I think the Joan Crawford character is interesting because you could kind of read that as I feel like you could give this story the more cynical reading, which she's like, I know he's gonna die anyway, and then I get all of his money. But there is kind of I think the movie ends more optimistically than that, and you know that she's going to make sure that he has the time of the life of his life forever, however long he has left.
She's like, I know how to have
really
a good
important.
time at a Grand Hotel, and we're going to make sure that you have a good time at a Grand Hotel.
Yes, and I think the other thing that's really interesting about this movie is that the Joan Crawford character and the Baron character are definitely flawed, and you could give more cynical or harsher readings of them, but the movie does really interesting things with like what it means to be a decent person and what it doesn't. And I think that there's really interesting like character development in that way, in terms of who maybe faces a moment where they could be dishonest and chooses to do good by somebody else, and who doesn't.
I think it's also important. It's interesting that I picked the 10 specifically as opposed to anything else because 10 in tarot also signifies the end of a cycle. And so that seems very poignant as the end of his life is approaching. So before we dive into reviews, let's talk about ratings. So normally we would say, do you want to take a guess at the rating? But this is...
Did the rating system exist at
No,
this time?
because this is pre-code,
Well.
so the rating system did not exist. So what are your thoughts, I guess, on like if this were to be maybe like rated today, if we had a similar kind of rating system back then, what do you think?
That is an interesting hypothetical to consider. I mean, I think the film is ultimately pretty tame, which I think is what you would expect for a 1930s movie. You know, I don't really think that there's anything in it that's more than PG. I think that there's a lot of adult material that is discussed more openly than you would see probably after the Hays Code goes into effect. But it's all, I think, would go over most children's heads. So it's all still kind of implied. The adults can laugh at taking dictation.
Exactly.
So I don't know that I would give it a particularly high rating, but I do think that if people were watching this movie, there probably is more mature content than you're used to seeing in older Hollywood films, because it does touch on suicidal thoughts and murder.
Yeah.
And
Sex,
not necessarily, married sex. There's also, I would argue, a lot of queer coding going on in this movie.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, so there are definitely, I think, a lot of, like, more mature, kind of, sometimes darker subject matter than you would typically expect to see in an older Hollywood film.
Interesting. So then would it interest you to learn that, and this is according to IMDb, so I don't know how incredibly true this is, but apparently many censor boards in conservative American states, like, because at the time could decide what kind of cuts of the film they wanted to air based on what the content of the film was. Many censor boards in conservative American states almost cut out Joan Crawford scenes entirely for indecency. So there are
well, that's like most of the movie,
right? Yeah, but there were apparently versions of this film floating around that had very little, if any, Joan Crawford at all.
Wow, that's a totally different
movie. Which is a totally
then.
Different movie, and like, I think again that speaks to a sort of like it couldn't have been rated at the time, but would have probably resulted in something like akin to an R rating just for that alone. But I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think maybe to help people understand like post Hays Code and pre Hays Code, like a big difference that, in terms of things that happened in this film that I don't think would happen a few years later after the Hays Code goes into effect. The Joan Crawford character and Mr. Bad Guy,
the boss,
who asks her if she travels, and he's not talking about going on a trip, that he actually offers to get her a hotel room for the night, and you see that her hotel room is adjoining.
I was about to say, yes, not just a hotel room, the hotel room right next door with a door in between. We see the two of them wandering around in bathrobes over their pajamas.
Yes.
Which is
scandalous. So I think that sort of stuff probably doesn't fit into Hays Code era. Mm-hmm. Married couples must have
separate
two
beds.
separate twin beds. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So, then what, tell me, what are your thoughts and your feelings on the movie, if any, going into it, before you saw it, while you were watching it? Where's your brain at?
Wait, actually, before we leave the rating, I think one other thing that is interesting that I don't think would necessarily warrant a higher rating for something, but I do think is very interesting, is there was a lot that appealed to my socialist heart in this film. Because there's a lot about how money and capitalism will really just destroy people, and that, you know, and that the way that even having a so to speak decent life, like a decent salary and decent health insurance and all of that stuff, is still kind of controlling your life in a way that is restrictive and doesn't allow you to fully appreciate what it means to be alive. Yeah, so
that's the whole point of
that. I thought was really interesting.
The dying man's plot is that he can't live until he's dying, because that's the only time when money doesn't matter anymore. Absolutely. Yeah, and so I think a lot of that theme comes from the dying man, and there are moments where he really tries to confront the boss, who is the one who also solicits Joan Crawford. And when he confronts the boss, he has these great monologues about how this man is a terrible man who doesn't even know the people he works for, who when this man was out sick for 4 weeks was basically told, you're going to lose your job if you don't come back to work, regardless of whether or not he was better. And so I think that there's a lot that's really interesting about kind of questioning the capitalist system that's happening here. But then that leaks into all the other storylines too. The Baron's character. He's also, I mean, that comes up again and again, is that he just wanted money so bad. Which also comes from a point of pride that he can't just accept the wealth of the ballerina he's in love with. He has to get his own money. So there's this really interesting that's why he steals the dying man's wallet and his lottery winnings. Yeah, absolutely. So he can get the ballerina.
Yeah, so there's this also interesting entanglement of capitalism and masculinity and traditional gender roles. And I would say that the bad guy boss also really represents, he really wants to represent this idea of the good man who is the provider for his family and the successful businessman, and who is decent, and he calls himself an honest man at some point, and he's very concerned with this kind of masculine provider role that capitalism has set up for him, and that ultimately is what leads him to be the most dishonest character in the film.
Yeah.
And a murderer.
And a murderer. I didn't even think about socialism as a part of a censorship thing, because I would be, I keep going around and around because I have so many things I want to say. That's not really something that seems to be discussed a lot in these reviews. Well, the reviews definitely have a very specific through line of feelings about this movie, and none of it is about that kind of discussion, which is interesting because there's some reviews that also say it is very true to the stage play, and the stage play is pretty true to the novel. So I wouldn't be surprised to learn that this was a conversation throughout every iteration of this text, but nobody seems to either notice or care, because we're just look at the pretty famous people.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, this is speculation because I can't say this for a fact, but I would imagine a lot of movies in these first couple years of the early 30s might have taken the side of the little guy versus the big businessman because we are in this Great Depression moment.
Sure. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people wanted to go to the movies at this time and feel seen and empowered and also feel like they were going to a grand hotel and watching a grand old time that they themselves could not afford because you needed a pick-me-up in those times.
Sure. So, what's your thoughts or feelings about the film as you viewed it? What's your understanding or idea of the reception that it might have had in its time? Tell me some things.
Okay, so I knew nothing about this film until you picked it for our podcast. Yes, and I know absolutely nothing about its reception.
Yay!
So I'm excited to hear about that. In terms of my personal response to it, I will admit the beginning's a little slow.
Yes.
It's a slow setup.
It is a slow setup
but
because there's so many people you have to be introduced to.
Yeah, and I was surprised because it is an almost 2-hour long movie, which feels lengthy to me for
the 30s.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is because it apparently stayed so true to the stage show, which at the time it was pretty normal for something like that to run about 2 hours. Sorry, I'll stop interrupting you.
Yeah, but once it gets rolling, I was pretty invested in it because it does become very philosophical and about all these people trying to figure out that really there's a lot of different confronting mortality and what your existence is in this film, and it's not afraid to take these really poetic monologue moments and have these pauses in it, and it's beautifully lit and the scenery is extravagant and fun, and the actors are so done up that they almost look like they're wearing masks and they're wearing wild costumes, and it's really kind of this strange existential world that the film brings you into, and I ended up really, really enjoying that.
That's awesome. I'm so glad you brought up so many things like the existentialism and the set design, because we'll talk about some of that. Okay, so let's get into the reviews. All right, so I had mentioned, I was going to say off camera, but we're not really on camera, off recording. I had mentioned that I experienced some fun issues in researching reviews for this because the film didn't come out until April of 1932, and the stage play, Grand Hotel, was on and off Broadway over the years leading up to the film's release. Even in the same year, it was in theaters as a stage show in New York in the same months that the film premiered in Manhattan. It's so there's a lot I had to sort through of determining what was the play versus what was the movie. But there was a lot of hubbub in the lead up to the film itself being released. That was all it was all entirely focused on the stunning cast of characters. For 2 months leading up to the filming of the movie, there were dozens of little bits in news clippings that was just a little one paragraph throw off that was what's happening in Hollywood right now, that was talking about how much of a big deal it was that Greta Garbo had been cast as the ballerina and whether or not she wanted the role. There was all of this gossip about whether or not she was going to accept it, whether or not she wanted to have it, whether or not she liked it. There was a lot of really excited discussion about the appearance of John and Lyle Barrymore in a film together. 1932 was the first time they were in any movies together. They were at least 2 films together that year. I don't know about any additional ones, and I have unfortunately forgotten the name of the other movie that they were in together, but that was a really big deal that the 2 of them were in a movie at the same time. What else? And then all of the other pre-release gossip was just kind of throwing shade at the celebrity cast. Like, people were fascinated by this huge star-studded cast, and then they were also just, like, shitting all over them for absolutely, apparently no reason. So one clipping had this to say about Greta Garbo's casting. Only Garbo could do justice to the dynamic and temperamental Terpsichorean star about whom the strange story revolves. Which I think is hilarious.
Love it when we throw a Greek muse
right,
in there.
we love a Greek muse, but also I think this is hilarious because on one hand I'm like, are they calling Greta Garbo temperamental? Because I don't know if that dig is entirely earned, but I kind of love it. And 2, I wouldn't say the story revolves around her. Would you?
No.
But a lot...
If anything, I would say it revolved more around Joan Crawford, which is interesting because she's ultimately not really the love interest.
The other thing that was happening a lot in these pre-release little blurbs was people pitting Garbo and Crawford against each other for absolutely no fucking reason.
Pitting 2 powerful women against each other in media is kind of
right.
America's favorite pastime.
So something we're joking about before we started recording was there was a lot of places that described Greta Garbo's character as an aging ballerina. We did the math. Greta Garbo was 27 when this movie was filmed. So, certainly...
Wait, in all fairness, I think where I saw that was in a Wikipedia summary.
Well, because she was... 1905 was her birth year, and then...
No, I saw the aging ballerina
okay.
line,
I
think in a Wikipedia summary.
That's fair. I saw a lot of other descriptions of the play that describe her, the character, as an aging ballerina. Okay. So that's... The character itself...
But yes, she was 27.
Yeah, so... But there's a lot of these little blurbs pitting the aged ballerina to Crawford's young ingenue. There was one blurb. Oh,
speaking of which, I was trying to figure out how old Crawford was, because I was trying to figure out if there was supposed to be some sort of
like a little aging, like age mother difference. Maiden. Yeah.
I'm not sure that we know when Joan Crawford was born.
What? Hang on. Joan Crawford birth date. The Oklahoma Historical Society says 1906.
I'm seeing 1906 but in IMDb.
The general Google overview says her birth date is the March 23rd, but the year is debated. And then it lists
in
04,
Britannica,
05, 06, 08, or 09.
Yeah, Britannica has 1904 ?
Her birth certificate is missing.
Yeah, so that actually means that it's possible she was either the same age or even older than Greta Garbo.
This one particular blurb says, they are telling everywhere that Joan Crawford is stealing Grand Hotel from John and Lionel Barrymore, Greta Garbo, and other famous members of the cast. And there were so many clippings that were like, Joan Crawford is going to steal the show. And there were some like this that said she's going to steal the show from everybody. More of them were saying she is going to steal the spotlight from Greta Garbo. There was a lot of concern that she was going to be outperforming Greta Garbo in this film. A lot of people were really bothered by that being a possibility.
It's kind of funny because their characters, though, are also, like, totally different, and I don't think that their characters ever even interact in the movie, so it's really, like, not even...
They do not share...
Not really a thing.
They do not share a single scene, and we'll talk about that in a more contemporary review later on. More catty celebrity gossip, lots of papers, pre-released praise for director Edmund Goulding for his patience in working with so many big stars. Someone said he was working like a Trojan 12 hours out of the 24, but the personnel of the scene, and then it lists all the actors, needed rehearsing repeatedly.
Well, it's a good thing that there was Trojans on the set that had so much dictation.
And then apparently often, so this was written by a reporter who actually had a chance to observe filming one day. Apparently when he finally got things under control, camera equipment failed. And so they had to redo things another day. So a lot of these places were praising him for being just like such a godsend for working with these divas. And then some people just like straight up speculated that these people were having a hard time working with each other, saying like, there's surely a lot of bickering on set because one actor is afraid another will get too much footage. Like,
right, so that word surely sort of implies you have no real basis for this, do you?
No. Okay, and then here I've got a clipping that I just wrote. I wanted to read something right from it. Let's see. Okay. We have hitherto heard of all-star casts, but it remains for this Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer production to surpass anything that has happened in this production. It may be that this array of stellar performers will make the picture top-heavy, but at any rate, this should be a cinema treat worth traveling miles to witness. And then another... a sort of press release before the film by Donald H. Clark is titled Constellation of 5 Stars to be a Screen Experiment. This was apparently a very, very big deal. Since the early days of the motion picture, when producing companies sought to curb the star system by billing their players as the Triangle Girl or the Biograph Man, this question has come up again and again, but until recently... no picture company has had courage enough to attempt the experiment which would settle the problem for all time, which is it worth the great expense to have so many stars? In a way, Grand Hotel is not in itself the experiment, but rather the culmination of an experiment extending over the past few years. This is something that MGM has been working towards. 6 MGM pictures released within the past several months have had 2 stars in leading roles. In Grand Hotel, however, no less than 5 stars are to be seen together in one picture. And then they go on and talk about the different actors themselves. So, all of the, like, pre-release buzz about this movie, even though, like, we knew the plot, we knew the novel, we'd seen the play, none of this pre-release buzz was about anything to do with the actual story of the film, but was just about how big of a deal it was, that there was so many stellar people in one single production in a way that had never really been done before, but had been attempted in a way by MGM. And no one really knew how it would turn out. It was just this big question of, like, not even a question, like, we know people are gonna go to the theater in droves to see this, but is it gonna be worth it, or is it too many cooks in the kitchen? So... April comes, the film actually releases, and the first review I find is an advertisement, and I'm going to share my screen and show it with you, because it's just so fun. Boom! Look at all those stars!
It's a lot of words.
That's a lot of words. It's just a big square. There's stars going around all 4 borders of the page. And it says, there is no sense in quoting the reviews of Grand Hotel. No picture ever received such critical acclaim. Practically every sentence in every review is a rave. Grand Hotel speaks for itself. Thank your stars. And then it lists all the stars from the movie, which I think was actually pretty clever.
Movie poster also has all the stars' faces in stars.
I didn't know that. So they're really hyping up this has got a lot of famous people in it. What I think is my favorite part about that is actually from the day of its release, April 12th, 1932, at which point there were no reviews of the film printed yet. So there really is no sense in quoting the reviews of Grand Hotel because there weren't any. But, I'm sure it worked. Okay, the first actual review that we can find from a few days later is a very interesting, like, clipped sort of like, here's what you need to know before you decide if you want to bring, like, a date or a kid or your mom to go see this movie. Best scene, the shots from the high balconade looking down upon the bustling crowd in the lobby. Best performances, Greta won John Barrymore. Photography, well lighted, imaginative. Audience reception, enthusiastic applause at finish. Family suitability, never offensive. For children, this is mainly adult entertainment, which feels a little
How exactly
contradictory
are
to the
we
never
describing
offensive.
never offensive?
I have no idea. And then general rating, excellent film, transcription of a fine play, splendidly acted and intelligently directed. I feel like never offensive contradicts a bit with mature adult content, but like whatever. All right, then finally, day 3 after the film's release, we're on April 15th now, the returns are actually coming in, and people are actually writing like column-length reviews of this film. But guess what? People are still just obsessed with the fucking cast.
Damn. They're talking about the stars.
They're talking about the stars and not a lot else. I mentioned previously there was a lot of concern about whether or not Greta Garbo was going to be outshined in this performance, but thank God she was excellent. The first review I was able to find is literally just...
Because we had so many
so many doubts. Oh my God. The first review is literally, critics concede blonde star offers her greatest performance.
I love that we need to specify blonde.
Well, yes, because
star.
Joan Crawford is the brunette. Duh.
Okay. Of course.
And this whole, like, column and a half review is just like, thank God Greta Garbo didn't suck. So here we have the first returns are...
Wait, why were we against Joan Crawford succeeding here?
Literally no reason, except that's what the papers were saying. They were like, there's 2 powerhouse women.
Greta Garbo
Not only are there
the
5
darling
stars in this movie, but 2 of them are women. We cannot let both of them be good, obviously.
Right, and on that note, do you know how many people we see in the first 10 minutes of this movie and none of them are women?
Oh my God, I didn't even think about
Like,
that.
it's just man after man after man until somebody says, call a stenographer, and then finally 10
we
minutes
get Joan Crawford.
and like 40 seconds into this movie, we get Joan Crawford. The only exception to that is the very first scene are the operators.
That's
the
right. I
phone
do like the bit with the
operators.
phone operators. That's a really interesting. We can talk more about the
our
machines.
Greek chorus. Our Greek chorus
I
of the
didn't think
film.
about that. This person writes of, the thank God Greta Garbo didn't suck. Garboites, as in fans of Greta Garbo. Garboites.
Good to so for contemporary people, that's like the Beehive or the Monsters or the Swifties or the Believers.
The stands.
Garboites.
The Garbo stands. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't really have those for movie stars anymore.
No.
So I guess we don't really have movie stars anymore.
Burn. Garboites.
Well, they're not burning because they're not stars.
Reread my sentence. Garboites who have been restless under rumors that the glamorous one was the victim of show stealers can breathe freely again. The Garbo crown merely adds another gem. I was one of the doubtful ones when this talk of Garbo being eclipsed by Joan Crawford and Lionel Barrymore began to seep through.
All right, now we're mixing star and moon imagery? Come on.
Knowing how Louis B. Mayer and Irving Thalberg respect the MGM Queen, I scented a new form of ballyhoo. Turns out that's just about what it was.
A new form of
He
what?
was basically like, there was so much shit talk about Crawford eclipsing Garbo. I felt like this had to be people just like pumping up people to be angry and go see the movie, and thank God that's exactly what it turned out to be. He's like calling it out as a press stunt. Ballyhoo.
Ballyhoo.
And then he's just got a bunch of quotes from other Garboites about how wonderful she was. Let's see. Then another review also really focuses in on, again, the cast. Never before have so many big names gathered together for one production, and never before have so many fine artists dovetailed their talents so effectively and smoothly. There is no camera hogging in Grand Hotel, despite the concerns that the stars would be at each other's throats. I think, though, my favorite bit from this is... Where is it? The cinema version of Grand Hotel, Vicky Baum's sensational melodrama, which opened here this week, is one of the most remarkable achievements of the history of the film industry. Not one of the finest, but surely one of the most remarkable.
Do they explain what makes it remarkable as opposed to fine?
I think just the stardom, just the star-studded cast, like just literally remarkable as in the actual literal denotation of the word as in something to be remarked upon, not remarkable as in like amazing.
Okay.
So, yeah, a lot of concerns, not concerns, but just a lot of like, this is a big deal really just because of the cast. One of my favorite reviews is from a Brooklyn paper that complains that there may be too long of a wait for the film to come to their theaters. So people will have to cross the river to wait in line for hours at the box office there. Brooklyn must await its turn to see Grand Hotel, the magnificent Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer production that opened last week at the Astor Theater in Manhattan with a roar that is still echoing throughout the land. While Brooklyn waits, the announcement is made that Grand Hotel will be roadshowed in the important key cities. We have a right to consider this a genuine oversight on the part of the producers, and we may well remind them, the most emphatically, that Brooklyn likes its motion pictures fresh. This has nothing necessarily to do with the stars, but I just thought it was hilarious that every other paper is like, this is such a big deal, this is so amazing, it's so exciting, we get to see this, and Brooklyn's like, we want to see it too, thanks!
Yeah.
So, that was just fun.
Don't worry, Brooklyn.
Shippers. But
Now you seem to be considered more important than Manhattan. There you go. So you have your day.
But it does...
And I believe also, for any confused listeners, at this point in time, I think Brooklyn was actually separate from New York
Yes,
City.
they did talk about having to cross the river, and it was like quite a big deal. They also, though, really highlight just how big of a literal blockbuster this was, citing that people are lined up around the theaters, long lines of ticket buyers outside the Astor box office from 9 a.m. until the time of the evening performance, reflect the intense interest in the picturization of Vicky Baum's success. And this is... They seem to be, in some places, confusing the stage show and the film, because they do talk about it as a film and a picture and the MGM production, but I think this person is also just a little confused about its stage performance as well. But what was I saying? It talks about, there was something about... Oh, seats are selling 3 months in advance. That's what I wanted to bring up. So there's lines outside the theater all day long for a ticket for a movie that you won't get to see for 3 months. Pretty much primarily because of the star-studded cast. Let's see. There was an interesting review that also said the word ballyhoo in it. I thought you would like. Grand Hotel movie leads Broadway Theater Week with stars and ballyhoo. More ballyhoo. It had an interesting discussion. Again,
who knew ballyhoo was such a popular word at this moment?
There was also a really interesting discussion in this article about, again, like not just like the stars themselves, but how huge of a deal this was for MGM even attempting something like this when the stage production was selling the film rights. There was apparently this massive bid for it, and the reason MGM was able to get the bid for the film rights for the stage production is by announcing the greatest three-ring circus Hollywood had ever seen. the cast, and then it lists, people that it had in mind all under one roof. And then we talked about the stage dressing earlier, you said was very opulent. It says there would be acres of scenery as well. Several other reviews before the film.
By acres, we mean one hotel.
Yes, one hotel, but
Okay.
so there were some other reviews like pre the release of the movie that were detailing just how insane the set decoration was for this thing. One of them cites that there were 800 yards of silk required to film just the scene in the hotel bar. There's like a wall of fabric on one side of the bar, and that's...
I did think the way they used fabric to define space was really fascinating in the film.
Which I think is really interesting because it's really evocative of the fact that it was originally a stage show.
It is. It's evocative of the stage show. I think it's also evocative of what we were talking about earlier with the, all of these doors onto one hallway and what's going on behind them, and the man who has, half of his face disfigured. In this idea of kind of, there's a veil, and what's behind the veil and what's in front of the veil.
And the veil is 800 yards of silk in the 30s, which silk is expensive now.
Yeah. And then all of Joan Crawford's and Greta Garbo's costumes are also this very
gorgeous,
diaphanous,
diaphanous
material that feels very evocative of the curtains in the backdrop too. The curtains and other things that have folds
that take dictation very well. So this same review, as well as others, continues in the frame of the Garbo-ite kind of praise, saying she's wonderful, she brings to the role only that kind of X factor that Garbo could bring. This review, however, pans Crawford as no more than capable.
Ouch.
Which is, I have to imagine, because this is in a paper from Bristol, Tennessee, and so I'm wondering if this is one of those more conservative areas that predominantly cut her role out of the screening.
Right, if she seemed like a minor character, then what are you really going to say about her anyway?
And then finally, this review actually does some reviewing. They're like, look at all these big stars, but let's get down to how the movie was, shall we? It does some really interesting work comparing it to the stage show, which a lot of the actual reviews, when they come around to it, also do. They describe it as very visually moving. Something that you talked about was like the lighting and like the cinematography. There is such a love in the reviews back then and now of just the stunning kind of shots that you can get with a camera that you cannot experience on a stage. Like, there's so many of these shots of like camera going through crowds of bustling people in the lobby, or like peering over the balcony to the lobby of the hotel down below in an experience you can't get just being at the theater and seeing people, standing up on the balcony and looking down.
Right, and I think that's worth explaining there, too, that if you haven't seen this movie, is balcony the right... How would you describe... It's like an atrium in the middle of the hotel. As a
balconette. I don't know if that's a more accurate, but it's like the...
Basically, the rooms are on a circular hallway that look down into an open air atrium that is the main lobby. But so it has this spiral effect, which is then also mimicked in the black and white tiled floor on the lobby. So the whole thing
like circular and spiraling.
Is swirling. Yes.
I didn't make the connection to the tile in the lobby. That's good. This review also makes an interesting point that the staccato jumping about of scene and plot is ideally suited to the screen in a way that you can't quite get that same like jump cut, obviously, as you can in a theater production. Ultimately, like, I've never seen the stage show, but it's very likely that a lot of it went the same way a lot of stage productions did then, where the whole thing probably takes place in like one setting in the hotel, like in the bar perhaps, or in the lobby, or outside in the hallway of people's rooms or something. But this adaptation to the screen allows us to jump very seamlessly between storyline and storyline and to get into those really intimate areas. This is not what this review says, but I think if this review had the vocabulary that we do now, this is kind of what it's trying to suggest, is that because it's adapted for the screen, we get to see so many more neat and interesting things about the story that we would not have been able to because it's on the stage. Ultimately, though, by the end of things, he again wraps up just a little bit bitter that the film has this huge fanfare just because of the cast when the stage show was equally well performed. So it still is coming down to the stars are the only thing holding this together. And then in our final review from the 30s, there were a ton. I'm just picking out a few that felt really representative. The New York Times did a review the same week of its release, and it starts with this glorious... Let me see if it'll actually open it, because it's an archive one, so it should let me read it. Yeah, here we go. This New York Times review, I just want to read you the opening paragraph. For the first showing last night of the film of Vicky Baum's stage work Grand Hotel, those worshippers of the stars of Hollywood firmament choked the sidewalk outside the Astor and also the theater lobby, while policemen afoot and on horse urged the throng to keep moving, and from across Broadway blinding beams of light added to the general excitement. Inside the theater, it was for a time difficult to move, but very slowly, for many of those who had tickets pressed into the aisles and behind the orchestra seats with the evident hope of catching a glimpse of one or another cinema celebrity. But once microphone music came from the stage, spectators hastened to their places, and soon the introductory scene of the much-talked-of motion picture was emblazoned on the screen. It was that of the telephone operators in the Grand Hotel, and the pushing and shouting was a thing of the past.
Emblazoned.
Did I say emblazoned? I do that.
Yes.
I go back and forth sometimes. I just love that vivid picture of like the throng of people just so desperately excited to see this huge star-studded movie, and then as soon as it comes up, it's just whoosh. Very exciting.
The theatricality of the criticism
Yes.
mirrors the theatricality of the film production.
Yes, absolutely. This reviewer as well, Mordaunt Hall, I think that's how you say their name, does also do some praise for the filming itself, saying that Goulding did great work to bring it to the screen, although he apparently relies too much on close-ups. Which I don't really recall, but maybe we're primed to not be quite so aware, because it's such a normal thing in movies
and
now.
it's such a psychologically intimate film that I feel like the close-up is warranted. And psychologically intimate, but a lot of the scenes themselves are intimate, whether that's romantic intimacy or people kind of up to no good in various ways. Yeah, but I think it's also interesting, too, because I think those very, like, enclosed moments in the bedrooms or the close-ups on people's faces as they're experiencing psychological turmoil then mirrors those broader shots of here's this spectacular spiraling lobby shot, which also then, you know, in turn mirrors the spiraling of the characters psychologically.
Yeah. It's interesting you go in a psychological direction with an interpretation, because I went very like production practical with it. I had wondered if this was like a holdover from a silent film era, having to get so close up on people's faces for like the dramatic expressions to convey emotion and meaning. And I had also wondered if this, again, was a result of being in the early talkies era of, like, having to be that close to be able to make out the things that people are saying amidst the very big crowded scenes, like in the bar and in the lobby.
Well, I guess my question about that, though, is I don't know that the equipment for recording sound is the same as the camera.
I don't think it is. But I wonder, I guess, if that was, like, to try to... Again, going along your idea of intimacy, like give the impression that like we're right here listening to their intimate conversation because we're so close to them and how exciting that is.
Yes. Or there's moments too where, you know, like I talked about that moment with Greta Garbo in the ballerina costume where we're watching her from the crack of the wardrobe door. So there are moments where you're getting certain characters' perspectives, and that does involve really this sort of tunnel vision. Yeah.
What I found really interesting about this review is that he says at one point, but it should be stated that in one scene, he, Goulding, permits an extremely gruesome idea to creep in. This will probably be eliminated at some future exhibitions. And that's it. I have no idea what scene they're talking about. There is no intimation of what that could refer to. Maybe it's the murder. Maybe it's like the sexy proposition, do you take dictation? Maybe it was like an intimate moment between the Baron and the ballerina. I have no idea. But this was in the New York Times. Like, this is at screening in the Astor. They were like, oh, this was too scandalous even for us. So you may miss it. And
I think a lot is too scandalous for the New York Times.
What was it? I don't mean the New York Times. I guess I just meant, like, New York in general compared to, like, the Tennessee one we were reading previously. But what was it? I have no idea. I'm so desperate to know. And we may never know.
I know. I feel like by saying that, everybody went, well, now I have to watch it and find out what the gruesome scene is.
Or maybe when the ballerina's, like, contemplating taking her own life. Maybe that was it, because it talks about a gruesome idea. Yeah. Not a gruesome visual. I don't know. But it was just such a fascinating, like, tell me what you're talking about. I have to go see it. I have to go see it before they cut it out, you know? What an interesting, I don't know if that was the intention, but what an interesting thing to put out there and then just not fucking explain. Tantalizing. Okay, are you ready to come back to the 21st century? All right.
Okay.
Phew, here we are.
Did we get in our hot tub again?
Hot tub again. We're all...
Or a DeLorean.
It's a limo DeLorean with a hot tub in the back. Thoughts?
Classy.
Yeah, exactly. And then we're rolling up to the film magazine headquarters. Because almost a century later, they have a review that was published in 2020. The tide seems to have seriously turned regarding the reception of this movie, but in a really interesting way. This review writes, the capability of all this film involved is something that can still be felt close to a century later in the airtight script, spectacular performances, and air of professionalism that pulsates throughout the screen. So gone are the speculation of stars being bitches to each other. They're like, no, this was a tight film. It was very well done, very professionally done, excellent. And then also says that over the years, we have seriously, like, tainted our memories of the movie's reception as nothing but a star vehicle. Even though our review of those reviews is pretty much everybody thought it was just a star vehicle. So I don't know where that comes from. That he's like, no, everybody loved it, and now we just think of it as, like, a star vehicle. But no, pretty much everybody thought, at least my impressions, thought that it was a star vehicle to begin with. This is the review I was telling you about before that remarks upon the interesting situation of being a pre-code film that can get away with stuff. Like the lines like, I don't suppose you'd take dictation for me sometimes, would you? From the boss to the secretary.
We just can't get enough of
I
that
love
one,
that
can
line. So there's a lot of, like, very, I mean, not, again, they're, like, talking about dictation, but, like, they're talking about dictation, right? So it's not a very open acknowledgement.
Thank you for spelling that one out
welcome.
for us.
It's not a very open acknowledgement, but it's as open of an acknowledgement as you could get in the 30s that sex exists and people like it, incling women like Joan Crawford.
And the wide open doors between adjoined hotel rooms is pretty open.
It also makes an interesting discussion about Joan Crawford's character. Apparently, she plays it a little bit, or not necessarily she plays it, but like the director has her play it a little bit more like cunning than the character in the stage production. I from what I understand about the character in the stage show, it's not that she's like completely innocent and like, of course, yes, I'm just here to do work and be a secretary and that's it. But like, she gives a lot more of an impression in the film that she is a liberated woman using sex to her advantage to climb these social ladders, because she knows that's not ideally, but pretty much the only way that she can do so.
I found that very enjoyable about her character. That she was witty and clever, and she knew exactly what she was talking about with these men, and was really trying to make sure that she used these situations to her advantage, which then makes it all the more heartbreaking when you know she's in a moment where she can't really refuse because she really does need the money. But yeah. The other thing that that brought up a question for me. So going back to the film as a star vehicle, do you know anything about any of Joan Crawford's other films and the type of character she typically played? Because I also wonder if this was very much part of the Hollywood star system and about having 5 big stars. Was there a certain amount of bending some of these characters to fit the personas of the stars themselves rather than a unique character?
So some of the things that Joan Crawford is most famously known for are Mildred Pierce and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. She was definitely like a part of the Hollywood system in this era. She was, I don't know if she was in like similar like sexy femme fatale roles, but she did not become like a person who played very like sympathetic or completely pure and innocent characters until like her career revival in like the Mildred Pierce era. That was sort of the first time, at least to my understanding, that she was in roles where like the character like did no wrong at all. Not to say that she was only playing like seductive succubi vamps before then, but like she was I wouldn't say she necessarily had like a brand really, and which is and a part of her problem was that she like succumbed to the system and people stopped wanting to hire her and stopped offering her contracts, and she didn't work for a really long time until Mildred Pierce and those Oscar nominations. So I don't know if it was bending the role exactly to fit with her. But that is a good question. Yeah.
I also don't know how many movies she had done before this. I mean, this might have been...
It certainly wasn't her first.
I mean, she's obviously very young in this movie.
Was she? We don't know. It definitely wasn't her first, because she is often listed in the big, like, so many stars in this movie. Look at Joan Crawford. But I think it was a similar character to things that she had played before. But I don't think it was the only kind of character she had played before, if that makes sense. But I wonder if the desire was to kind of bend the character in that direction, so it's kind of like an opposing foil to the diaphanous, innocent, blonde ballerina who just wants to dance and be loved and has everything she wants and just wants the love of a good man. And then Joan Crawford is the brunette vamp who just wants money, you know? Not that I think that's what the character is, but I wonder if it was intentionally done that way to oppose them with each other, because, you know, we can't have two ladies in a movie in the 30s and have them be friends.
Nope. It's interesting bringing up Mildred Pierce, because that brings me back to my earlier point about the telephone and the typewriter girl. So, all right, disclosure. I have not seen Mildred Pierce, good. But I know that it's part of that early to mid 40s gothic romance era, the woman's film era, where we're making movies that are more geared towards a female audience. And So there's some very interesting readings of gender and women's place in society going on in those films. And of course, they correspond with World War II and Rosie the Riveter and women getting jobs and having a little bit more empowerment in their lives. And something that's really interesting about the Gothic romance is that there's often this idea of modern conveniences that become part of the sinister plot of the film. So, like, there are, the gaslight.
Yep.
Gaslight. There's actually a gas explosion in another film that is a very similar plot to Gaslight. And you see that a lot in the Gothic romance film. And so something that I thought was really interesting in this film, which even though it predates the woman's film and the Gothic romance, it definitely feels very much like on the path towards those types of films. There's something a little noirish, a little Gothic about the drama in this hotel. There's a lot of similar motifs to those films, so I don't think you quite get the... There's murder. Though I don't think you quite get the same, really female-centric sense in this movie. Though the Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford are both really fascinating characters in this movie. But the telephone. We start the film with a shot of the operators running the
switchboard.
Switchboard. Thank you. I was like, oh no, my vocabulary is going to fail me here. The human app machine.
The operators are running the switchboard, and?
The operators are running the switchboard. The operators also come back in again when there's been a murder, because somebody picks up the phone and talks to the operators and says there's been a murder, and they actually think it's a joke at first. And we cut to the room where all the switchboard room, and see them all talking about this and picking up the phone. The opening shots of the movie introduce us to the different male characters who are all on the phone to different people, with the exception of
on the phone
the
in,
older
phone booths next to each other, right? Yeah.
Yes. With the exception of the doctor, who is watching everybody. The doctor
watching all the nothing happening.
Nothing ever happens in the Grand Hotel. The phone. I think throughout the movie, characters get on the phone and have really important conversations on the phone. The
ballerina's assistant get on the phone to do something about organizing a car? Isn't there a whole elaborate thing of like, she's gonna actually go to the theater, we have to arrange everything now because she wasn't going to perform and now she is, and there's like a whole frantic thing to set everything up to make it as seamless of a transition as possible to get her ass to the theater, which of course then fails anyway. Yeah.
Right, and then there's also the Greta Garbo character, the ballerina. Once she's fallen in love with the Baron, gets on the phone multiple times to try to talk to him. And so the phone almost becomes, like I was talking about with the typewriter and taking dictation as the sexual intimacy, the phone becomes the way in which the mediator for sexual intimacy between the ballerina and the Baron. And the second time she tries to do this, of course, he's already dead, and she doesn't know, and she's just yelling, ring, ring, ring. And he's not picking up, because he can't. Yes, and that brings me to the climatic phone moment in this movie. The murder weapon is
Oh my
phone.
God. You're so fucking right.
Yeah. So it's interesting
how did I forget that? I
this
thought he
modern.
shot him.
No, he uses a very heavy,
there were like fucking
old-fashioned
bricks.
phone.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, I don't even think he uses the whole phone. I think he actually
the
just
handset,
uses the receiver.
Oh
yeah.
My God. Why did I think he shot him? I could have sworn. Oh shit.
I mean, it kind of feels
probably
like a shot
sounded
is
like a
fired
gunshot.
when that
Jesus,
phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, when there's a phone on the mantle, we're just waiting for it to go off.
Chekhov's telephone.
Yes, exactly. So, and I think there's even... Oh, is there one more phone thing that I was thinking about? Damn it, now I can't remember. Oh, the phone is also how the Baron nearly gets caught when he's trying to steal the pearls of the ballerina because he accidentally knocks over the phone. And so then either the operator or the hotel staff is calling the room. And then I think the assistant to the ballerina comes in and answers the maid comes in and she's like, no, nobody's here. And they're like, somebody picked up the phone. So there's this the phone is just used as this mediator in so many different ways in this movie in terms of communication, in terms of human connection, in terms of sex, in terms of death. So I think that that's a really interesting thing, and that feels like it's really setting us up for this like gothic romance woman's film and these anxieties about this technology that's coming into your everyday life that's supposed to be more convenient. That's coming into your homes, that's now facilitating your relationships with other people.
This is really just
including a man killing another man with the phone.
There you go. That's much more poignant than I was going to say, which is, this is just setting up for the age of dating apps.
Let's not go there.
Well, getting...
But yeah, phone sex definitely is a thing in this movie. Yeah. People might dispute that, but they're wrong.
I agree. I'll take a little detour before sort of I come to my final thoughts from, again, this film magazine review, because I think they end on a really poignant note that touches on some of the things that you have found interesting. But I always enjoy taking a dip through the reviews of the casual viewers. So let's look at our IMDb user reviews, because that's my favorite part. Are you ready? You can tell this is one of the first talking pictures. Very
Is that it?
That's it. I just pulled the titles, because those are the best part.
Okay.
Very melodramatic, but pretty good. Good now, great dead. Dated, melodramatic, ... and magnificent. The last part's all in caps. I agree with them there.
With that one.
This is so dumb.
Did nobody say Grand Hotel is grand?
Hang on. A stylish silent movie, but with sound. A little boring.
Okay.
And here you go. A grand cliche.
Oof.
For funsies, this didn't really seem to have anything to do with, again, the review of the film itself, but it does kind of speak a bit to the early, like, pre-release press stuff, pitting Garbo and Crawford together. And also just kind of sounds a little fun. Somebody's review was just titled, Crawford tops Garbo here. And I felt like I should include it because I 100% think that that's something Greta Garbo would have been into. So there you go.
There you go. So if you were going to write a review of Grand Hotel, what would you title
I mean, it's
review?
hard to get better than Crawford tops Garbo. Oh, goodness. I feel like a lot of people in the user reviews here are using melodramatic to call it a bad thing, but I think melodramatic in the best possible way, because it is dramatic. It is a stage show.
Melodrama is a respected genre in its own
and
right.
In its form as a stage production, that's exactly what it was trying to do, and I think if that carries over into the film, then that's even better. So I would say, like, melodramatic, but in a good way. Melodramatic, but in the best way. A grand melodrama, if you will.
taking the mellow out of melodramatic.
There you go. So I want to end on this quote though from.
Wait! I have one other question though before we move away from melodramatic. Yes. Would you actually consider? I mean, the acting styles in this film are definitely very different than the more naturalistic approaches that we're used to today, which I think is probably pretty typical of that time period. Would you actually consider the film a melodrama, or would you just say that it's kind of is what the style was?
I think I'm thinking of it kind of as what the style was at the time. I don't know that I'm all familiar enough with the elements of capital M melodrama as a genre to say, do you have a better idea of...
I have a little bit of familiarity with it, but more how it's used in the 1950s, and I don't know if it's fair to compare with Douglas Sirk. Yes. So I don't know if that's fair to compare 30s and 50s. I did feel that Greta Garbo's performance was particularly melodramatic, and I wondered if that was intentional, because she is probably the most psychologically stuck in her own mind, that if she was really, and she is also a stage performer, that is her character's role. So I wondered if there was maybe even intentionally playing up the melodramatic acting style for Greta Garbo. And again, I'm not super familiar with Greta Garbo's other films, so I don't know if that's something she was known for or not in other films.
I don't actually know either. This is, I'm pretty sure, the only thing I've ever actually seen her in. I just know of her because her name is just so, famous and synonymous with old Hollywood and also lesbians.
Yes.
So she's just on my radar.
She is, I think also, though, more than just the acting style, her face and her makeup.
Yes,
and
the makeup
the way that both Greta Garbo and even Joan Crawford, but I think Greta Garbo more so in this movie, is really done.
Those eyebrows.
To be... Yeah, the eyebrows are permanently expressive.
Like, imagine the eyebrows people drew on themselves in, 2008. But, 4 inches higher up on their foreheads.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, now, we don't have to stop here, but the quote that I want to end on, because I think it touches on a lot of the things that you have unprompted been saying about your particular feelings on this film, is also from the Film magazine, talking about just the timelessness of the story, no matter what medium it's falling into. Such a frank treatment of human behavior allows the film to remain timeless and familiar. The sweet spot of 1932 is therefore essential to the film's essence. From its costumes, to its set, to its performances, Grand Hotel exudes sophistication and understands itself. Why it has been ignored by the modern film community is perhaps unanswerable, but hopefully its reputation will be restored in the near future, especially if this reviewer has anything to say about it. But yeah, just this idea of the frank treatment of human behavior. I feel like above all of the other storylines, every other character that's there, whatever's going on, I think that's what it's about, really. And this review captures that well in a way that nobody else seemed to care to in the 30s, because we were all too excited about the goddamn superstars.
Well, people were going through a rough time, so I think they needed some superstars.
Which is also fair, yeah. But, it was...
Well, I think it's interesting, too, because I think what struck me most in the film was not so much this idea of melodrama, but actually the way in which human nature was dealt with in it. And that is what really resonated with me, as this still feels like
people being people.
An enjoyable film that resonates almost 100 years later.
Absolutely.
And on that note... The music has stopped
and
now.
It was never so
the phone is disconnected.
And it is quiet in the Grand Hotel. Thank you for joining us. You can find your Silver Nitrate Witches on various online platforms at LJ Valenza and at Bellang303. Thanks so much to Fine Motor for the use of their song Highway Moon. You can check out more about the band at finemotormusic.com. Thanks for listening. Stay witchy and keep watching movies.